Coming up on UGTV, Board of Commission meeting of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Gentlemen, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Roll call. Kane. Here. Markley. Here. Walters. Here. Philbrook. Here. Bynum.
Here.
Walker. Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan. Murguia.
Here.
Johnson. Here. Holland.
This evening, I don't see Pastor Cynthia Smart here for the invocation. I'm going to call on Reverend Commissioner Harold Johnson to lead us in prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
May we bow our heads. Eternal Father, our God, we thank you tonight for bringing us together. We are mindful today, Lord, of all of those that are around our country, that are suffering, that are hurting, that are lost. We pray, Lord, that you would be a balm that would lift them up with your love. And not only that, but even in this area that we call Kansas City, we ask that you would be with us, Lord. And even as the leadership of this great commission, we ask you would be a guiding light to us. And we ask you, Lord, that you would light our path and show us the way that we may lead this city into your graces and into your goodwill. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I'd like to let you know that Mayor Holland is en route, and the first thing I will do is ask the clerk if there are any revisions to tonight's agenda.
Yes, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. We do have a revision. There's an item number 4 has been added under the non-planning consent agenda. It's an ordinance authorizing the Chief Counsel to commence legal proceedings to acquire property for the UG Juvenile Center Complex, Memorial Hall, and attendant parking area project. The Commission did approve this ordinance back on August 31st, and a clerical error was later discovered. Therefore, the ordinance must be corrected and readopted. That's the only revision I have.
Thank you. I'm going to recess us as the Board of Commissioners, and I'm going to move the order of the agenda us into the land bank portion of our agenda, which is the very last portion of our agenda. So that is going to allow Mr. Chris Slaughter to come forward, and we are in session as the Land Bank Board of Trustees, and you can thank me later.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on all items on your agenda. Is there any discussion on these items? Okay, roll call.
Roll call: Kane. Aye. Markley. Aye. Walters. Aye. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Bergia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you.
And now I will call us back into session as the Board of Commissioners. Tonight, we do have two distinct parts to our meeting. The planning and zoning part of the meeting is handled first, and then that will be followed by our regular commission meeting. I'm going to ask the clerk to read the statement, followed by the items on the planning and zoning consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We would like to welcome all persons present to this meeting of the Unified Government Commission. Members of the Commission are Mayor CEO Mark Holland, who's en route, Commissioner Melissa Bynum, At-Large District 1 and Acting Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioner Hal Walker, At-Large District 2, who was unable to attend this evening, Commissioner Gail Townsend, District 1, who you hear via conference call, Commissioner Brian McKiernan, District 2, who is also unable to attend, Commissioner Ann Murguia, District 3, Commissioner Harold Johnson, District 4, Commissioner Mike Kane, District 5, Commissioner Angela Markley, District 6, Commissioner James Walters, District 7, and Commissioner Jane Philbrook, District 8. As each petition is called, all persons for or against will be given the opportunity to express their views. If this is the first time that a particular petition has been before the Commission has three options. 1, it can approve the recommendation of the Planning Commission with 6 votes. 2, it can override the Planning Commission's recommendation, but it would take 8 votes to override. Or 3, it can return the matter to the Planning Commission for further consideration, together with a statement specifying the reasons for the referral back to the Planning Commission. The consent agenda is the first part of the Planning and Zoning agenda. Items on the consent agenda have received a unanimous vote of recommendation by the Planning Commission. Unless there is a request to set aside an item from the consent agenda by the applicant, a member of the public, the Unified Government Commission, or others, then the Planning Commission's recommendation on all of the items on the consent agenda will be adopted by the Unified Government Commission at one time. I will read the list of agenda items on the consent agenda, and when I have completed the list, the Mayor will ask if there are any requests to set aside items from the consent agenda. This is your time to stand up and request that an item be set aside if you do not agree with the Planning Commission's recommendation. If an item is set aside, the matter will be discussed and voted on separately. All items not set aside will be approved with the Planning Commission's recommendation. We appreciate the attendance of those people here this evening, and we recognize the importance of each petition. We would, however, remind you that there are a number of items on the agenda, and we would appreciate your efforts to make your remarks as concise as possible. We ask that anyone with a cell phone to please turn them off or switch to non-audio. Once the petitioners make their presentation, anyone for or against will be allowed a maximum 3 minutes to state their views. As you come to the microphone, please state your name and address for the record. The mayor and commissioners are required to disclose contact with proponents or opponents on any item on the planning and zoning agenda. At this time, does any member of the commission wish to disclose any contact with proponents or opponents on any item on the agenda?
Let the record show no one is coming forward with any disclosures.
I will now read the items on the planning and zoning consent agenda. Under special use permit applications, item 1, SP 2017-48, Scott Goebel for a telecommunications tower at 11501 Parallel Parkway, recommended for approval. Item 2, SP 2017-51, Lester Young, home occupation for a barber shop at 3401 North 30th Street, recommended for approval for 2 years. Item 3, SP 2017-52, Marcy Huckabee, renewal of a special use permit SP 2016-38 for live entertainment in conjunction with an existing restaurant and drinking establishment at 8121, 8123, and 8125 Parallel Parkway, recommended for approval for 5 years. Under plan review applications, item 1, PR 2017-29, Denton Stein, preliminary and final plan review for installation of a purified ice and water kiosk at 6000 Leavenworth Road, recommended for approval. Under miscellaneous, we have 8 ordinances. All of them are recommended for approval. Item 1, rezoning property at 1111 and 1115 North 17th Street and 1619 Nebraska Avenue from R2 Two-Family District to MP2 Planned General Industrial District. Item 2, rezoning property at 9001 State Avenue from CP1 Planned Limited Business District to CP2 Planned General Business District. Item 3, rezoning property at 2915 Brown Avenue from C1 Limited Business District to CP3 Planned Commercial District. Item 4, rezoning property at 1800 Still Road from C1 Limited Business District to CP2 Planned General Business District. Item 5, rezoning property at 10128 Nelson Lane from R1 Single Family District to AG Agriculture District. Item 6, rezoning property at 8932 State Avenue from R1 Single Family District to CP1 Planned Limited Business District. Item 7, vacating a drainage easement at 8440 Gibbs Road. And item 8, vacating an alley at 14 South 7th Street Trafficway. Those are all the items on the planning and zoning consent agenda.
All right, thank you. We'll now ask if any commissioner, staff member, or person in attendance tonight would like to remove any item from the consent agenda. Again, any item not so removed will be voted on by a single vote. Let the record show no one is moving forward to remove an item from the agenda. It is properly before us. Is there a motion?
For approval.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded for approval. Seeing no discussion, roll call.
Roll call, Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Aye. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0.
All right, that concludes our consent agenda. And that brings us to our planning and zoning non-consent agenda for a car dealership at 1010 Merriam Lane. I'd invite the applicant to come forward and to make presentation at this time. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Bryant Parker. I'm the attorney for the applicant, Abdul Mazid.
I reside at 5147 Wyandotte Street in Kansas City, Missouri. Sorry, I'm on the wrong side of the tracks.
You are on the correct side of the tracks, sir.
Okay. Oh, I meant in my residence, not here. I'm on the correct side of the tracks right now. So, and I'm a Kansas boy, so don't hold it against me. Don't know why I'm in Missouri. This evening, I've been engaged by Mr. Mazid to represent him in his application for a special use permit at 1010 Merriam Lane, a 24-month-long special use permit to allow this property to be used as a used car lot with 6 exterior car stalls. And without further ado, I want to get right into the presentation because I want it to be as short as possible. I'm a former city attorney, and so I very much respect your time. Here's a brief overview. As I said, we're requesting a special use permit with 6 exterior parking spaces and an additional 4 spaces for use as customer parking. Staff has recommended denial of this application based in large part on the community's vision for the future of this area. However, the Planning Commission recommended approval by a 7-2 vote subject to the following conditions: that the sidewalk requirement be deferred unless and until the special use permit is renewed in 2 years, that the brick restoration requirement be completed at the end of the first year, and that the applicant appear before the Board of Zoning Appeals regarding parking. And we wholeheartedly agree with all of these conditions as they modify staff's conditions, and with that, we request approval of the 2-year special use permit subject to Planning Commission's recommended conditions. This is an overview. This is a site plan of the property. It's at, as I said, 1010 Merriam Lane. What you'll see here is these are the 6 lots that would be painted for car sales. This is our customer parking, a very large ADA accessible spot, followed by 3 other non-ADA accessible spots. Staff would have the option, if none of these are occupied, of parking here, but more likely they would park inside because there is some storage available inside of the building that may also be used for a handful of cars, but it's not that large. So I first wanted to talk about the cost of denial versus the benefit to the city. The main benefit of denial is sending a consistent message that used car dealerships are not wanted in the Rosedale area. Denial has many costs and is not supported by factors to be considered under Kansas law and the Unified Government Zoning Regulations, and I want to get into that very briefly. So the ultimate impact of denial on my client and the community as a whole: if this permit is denied, my client purchased this property by an owner-carrying mortgage, and for those of you who aren't familiar, that basically means that the property owner prior to him is the one that's financing the note. And if my client defaults, is unable to make payments, it will revert to that property owner. And when it was in the hands of that property owner, for whatever reason, I don't say bad things about anyone, but it was subject to vacancy, vandalism, dilapidation, a lot of illegal dumping. You'll see photos before and after in just a moment. Nuisance violations and unlawful occupancy. So there's no reason to believe that if my client, who has invested well over $20,000, he may be closer to 30 at this point, of his own funds to clean up this property in the hopes that it could be used for a couple of years as a used car permit, a used car dealership, there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't go back to its former condition. At this time, we are not aware of any possibility of selling the property for a different use. And I was fortunate to meet with Ms. Stryka, who I very much represent of the respect of the Rosedale Development Association. And she was kind enough to provide me the names of 2 separate investors in the area that are looking at purchasing property actively along this corridor. I was able to reach one of them. I left a message for the other. And the comment from the one investor that I was able to reach that was interested in property in the corridor, he said, and I quote, "We are not interested in 1010 Merriam Lane. Any offer made would be a fire sale price, lacks parking, highway access, and has a 2nd story." And as I've said, denial actually hampers the redevelopment of the Southwest Boulevard Merriam Lane corridor. Businesses do not feel safe in investing in areas that are not kept up, and a lack of vandalism and a lack of property maintenance have been shown to encourage crime. Furthermore, denial is not supported by the criteria that this board is required to consider under Kansas law and under its code. And I want to preface this by saying these criteria are looked at in the present tense. Now, you consider your long-term plans, but that's just one consideration that the board brings in when they're looking at this type of a use. The applicant's attorney, myself, I'm the first to admit that long-term this may not be the most desirable use for this area. No question about it. I've already advised my client that should this board approve this special use permit, he needs to understand it is a temporary approval for 2 years. There's little to no chance that he should expect it to be renewed unless he has done his utmost to sell this property and recoup his investment, and he literally has not been able to do so. I've told him this is not a long-term location for him. Literally, he should just be focused on recouping his investment and moving on. That being said, my job is to take you through the factors, and I wanted to highlight a few of them. The character of the neighborhood and the zoning and uses of property nearby and the proposed uses' expected compatibility with them. The following businesses are located on Merriam Lane near the property. Most of them they're all within 1 block. You'll notice a theme, they're all automobile oriented. There's a used car dealership, Cholito's Auto Sales, forgive me if I mispronounced that. It's directly next door. Across the street is a gun store, Quick's Guns and Transfers. Caddy Corner across the street is at 1017 Merriam Lane is an auto repair shop and U-Haul rental store, Anders Automotive. And then on down about a block is an RV and mobile home parts and service store, KC Home Trailer. Factor 3, the suitability of the property for the uses to which it has been restricted. Will removal of the restrictions detrimentally affect the nearby property? And then the length of time the property has remained vacant is zoned. Currently, the property has been vacant or unlawfully occupied for at least the last 8 years. However, there was a long-term prior use of the property as an antique car sales business from 1987 to 2001. That's compared with much shorter stints of other uses, such as an auto repair store for 1 year and a retail market from 2005 to 2008. It shows that currently in this market condition, the property is more suited to be used as a used car business. We're not talking about the future. Factor 5, the degree of conformance of the proposed use to the master plan. Per page 3 of the staff report, the citywide master plan designates this property as the Business Parks District. This district allows light industrial uses and business/research parks as well as office, retail, restaurants, and other commercial and service uses. The Business Park District does not address used car dealerships. A car dealership is a retail or other commercial use, therefore it's allowed under the master plan. And then factors 7 and 11, whether the proposed use is reasonably necessary for the convenience and welfare of the public and will not substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use, visual quality, or marketability, and the relative gain to the public health, safety, and welfare as compared to denial as compared to the hardship imposed on the individual landowner or landowners. This goes back to the direct cost to my client. Again, we're talking well in excess of 20. He's probably total, if you look at the overall project, well in excess of $30,000 in investment for something that if this is denied, he won't recoup any of that cost. I have no expectation that he'll be able to continue to make payments on this debt. It will most likely revert to its former owner, which was unable to sell it for several years. And then you'll be subject to the code citations for graffiti, traffic, and abandoned vehicles. And I want to show you before and after pictures to show the work done by my client that contributes to the visual quality and the welfare of the area. This is as it was when it was purchased. Another picture as it was when it was purchased. Another picture. There it sits today. All of that's been removed, and again, we're going to continue to do improvements to restore this to the original brick face that it appeared at before it was painted. Notice the substantial investment in resurfacing the parking area to make it attractive and usable long term. Another picture. I apologize for the crookedness. That's the photographer's fault. And again, I want to emphasize that we're only asking for a 2-year special use permit. As conditions change and renovation or redevelopment of this property for a different use becomes feasible, renewal of the special use permit need not be granted. I would argue that's exactly why this governing body, and I think it was over a year ago, passed the 2-year special use permit requirement for used car dealerships. It's understanding that they are temporary and in many cases interim land uses until something that's more desirable can come along. But at the same time, it's important for properties to be occupied so that they're not only economically productive, but that they're not a drain on the neighborhood. And I've already talked about his limited financial resources. Those were taken into account by the Planning Commission, and that is why they postponed the brick the brick restoration until the end of the first year. And there was another condition that staff recommended for sidewalk installation. And they said we will defer that we recommend deferral of that for 2 years to see if this even has to be renewed. Hopefully the property will be sold. This is a photograph of where the sidewalk would be installed. It would go right up here. One of the reasons why this is not an inexpensive sidewalk to install, our engineer said it would probably be at least $20,000 to have the installation done. Because of the grade that's right here, if you can see my cursor. And so because we're talking about that level of expense for a 2-year special use permit, especially given the current finances of this project, we can't do it. It's not in the budget. We don't have ability to do it. This is where the sidewalk would end. This is a photograph of it. It's a sidewalk to nowhere. I'm not opposed to sidewalks whatsoever. I understand their need. At the same time, I don't know that there's a soon prospect of this sidewalk being continued in front of these residences. I could be wrong on that, but I needed to show that to the commission. I also wanted to show the efforts that we made after the Planning Commission, just try to document our plans to comply with the screening requirements that staff's recommended. And I did not get this to staff until yesterday, this updated site plan, but the only difference is we're showing some shrubs that are going to be planted in the public right-of-way, right? But they won't be more than 24 inches tall per city code. And then we have additional shrub work up here to screen the parking. And then I wanted to talk very briefly about parking and then leave it to staff, and I'm sure Ms. Stryka will have some comments. Staff has determined that a variance is required under the zoning code concerning parking. If the permit is granted, we'll apply for that variance, and we'll also appeal with the utmost respect for staff's determination, but still appeal that variance is even required. Currently, under the UG zoning code, staff's interpreted that the parking regulations would require 19 stalls. There's no way to achieve 19 stalls on this site, sort of destroying the entire building. That's why there's nonconformities in the code. And it's a discretionary interpretation whether nonconforming parking exists on this specific use. The relevant code section is section 27-389. Certain lawfully nonconforming conditions, including parking, right, are afforded legal nonconforming status. However, no change of use which creates a deficit or significantly increases an existing deficit in off-street parking spaces, right, will be allowed to be created. A deficit exists when the proposed use requires more parking, right, than can be provided. I would argue that a 6-space car sales dealership with maybe a few cars inside does not require more than 3 normal parking spaces and 1 ADA accessible parking space. And for that, we will submit additional information in front of the Planning Commission if this board is inclined to approve this application. Kansas City, Missouri is an example of other jurisdictions that take a more specific approach to parking requirements. They only require 1 space per 1,000 square feet of office space and covered display area. Using the current calculation, I don't have an exact square footage for this building, but assuming that it had 4,600 square feet, which I don't believe all of that would qualify as covered display area and office space because much of it is not being used. But even taking that calculation, that would only be 4.5 parking spaces under Kansas City, Missouri's code that would be required for this. And for a 4,000 square foot sales area, you would anticipate hundreds of, or at least around 100 car sales slots in front. So there's just no justification for requiring 19, more than 4 parking spaces based off of use, and I will be happy to provide more information on that. So in summary, approval of this application furthers the ultimate goals of the Rosedale Master Plan and Traffic Study to encourage the redevelopment of the Merriam Lane corridor because it's a transitional use. This is not intended to be the long-term use of this property. It's very temporary. But if this application is failed to be approved, it will encourage vandalism, crime, vacancy, and illegal dumping, which were the conditions that were present. So we're asking the Board of Commissioners to follow the recommendation of the Planning Commission and approve the special use permit subject to all of the conditions recommended by the Commission. I stand for questions if there are any. Thank you.
All right, before we get to questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the public hearing and ask for people who would like to speak in favor or speak against. Following that public hearing, if there are comments made, you would have an opportunity to make summative comments in response to anything that you hear. And after the public hearing, we'll ask our staff to weigh in, and then we'll open it up to the commission. So I'll open up the public hearing at this time. If there's anyone who would like to speak in favor of this request, please come forward at this time. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor? Let the record show no one coming forward. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward at this time.
Hi, my name is Erin Straka, and I'm here representing Rosedale Development Association at 1403 Southwest Boulevard. RDA is opposing the special use permit because we believe that a used car lot is not appropriate for this community corridor or for this site. The unified government has invested over $7 million in improving this corridor since 2013. With greatly improved stormwater control, sidewalks, curbs, curb bulb outs for easier walking, and bike lanes. This was done in a great effort to change and improve the character of this corridor and to attract high-quality development that serves the needs of the surrounding community. The Southwest Boulevard Miriam Lane Master Plan lays out neighborhood priorities for this corridor. One of those is developing a healthy mix of office, light industrial, retail, and residential uses in the corridor. Other priorities include a visually appealing streetscape and connected and walkable neighborhoods. RDA has opposed new car lots or automotive uses on this corridor because they do not fit with those priorities. As the corridor has improved, we've seen a lot of increased interest from businesses looking to locate on this corridor. RDA receives a couple of these calls every month, and I sent the 2 that I got that month to the applicant, and as you heard, that didn't work out, but we receive those calls continuously. However, right now, the concentration of automotive businesses on the corridor acts as a deterrent to new businesses coming in, other types of businesses coming in. In order to continue the work that the unified government has begun with all their investment in this corridor, we need to say no to additional used car lots. Used car lots, even when well maintained, don't contribute to the visual appeal of the corridor or to the green and walkable streetscape. I do agree that Mr. Mazid has done a great job improving the building, and we really appreciate that. And I also really appreciate his and his attorney's willingness to be in conversation with me about it.
Ma'am, you have 1 minute remaining.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Yeah, he's done a great job. I do want to say to the concerns about the property deteriorating if the special use permit isn't granted, we have a really great codes officer in this area who has ramped up enforcement quite a bit in the last couple of years, and I trust that that will continue to be the case, and that's not a concern for the neighborhood. Finally, as to the issue of the sidewalk being built onto Dodson, I certainly recognize that the sidewalk would be tricky from an engineering perspective and expensive, but given that the city has invested this amount of resources in this area, I do think it's reasonable to hold businesses to the same standard, whether that's now if you grant this permit or at renewal if you grant this permit. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in opposition? Let the record show no one else is coming to the microphone. We'll now close the public hearing. I'll give the applicant an opportunity to make a summative comment if you would like. Would you like to respond at all to her comments?
Only to say that my client, again, very much respects the Rosedale Development Association, and again, we appreciate that their position looks long-term for this area, but if denial of this permit will be devastating for my client, and that is one of the concerns that is to be considered under the factors. And I will say this as well, my client proceeded, English is his second language, and it's important I wish he would have come and called me before he purchased this building and sought my advice, but sometimes we don't always do that in life, and so he invested substantial amounts of money believing that if he did certain things that were identified as conditions that needed to be present on this property for this permit to even be considered, that he would be approved. I'm not saying that anyone on staff intentionally misled my client. I would never say that. I'm a former member of city staff and all my interactions have always been positive with the staff of the unified government. At the same time, I would be remiss and wouldn't do my job if I failed to explain that my client proceeded in good faith, believing that if he did certain things, this application would be approved. I'm quite sure he understands now that that was not a guarantee. Thank you.
All right, I'll now close the public hearing and turn it over to our staff. Mr. Richardson, do you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me address the misunderstanding first. We do a lot of pre-application meetings, and there's never a case where we would tell anyone they had to do something before they applied. That's just not part of our code. It's not part of what we do, and we know how much is at risk for that. So that was a very unfortunate misunderstanding, but I don't think that you can buy a property and invest in it and then use that as your reason why you should get approved. The investment there is great for the community, but I would assume that if he was willing to pay a market rate for it and he's done improvements to it, that there might be someone else from out of the area like he was that would also want to invest in the area in possibly a different way. As far as the factors to be considered go, related to factors number 1 and number 2, the applicant's attorney completely ignores the fact that there are residences in the area, and we're trying to improve the area, not just the commercial corridor, but the corridor for the residences. And the used car lots are typically not uses that inspire better residential living. The future does matter, and the future uses of the corridor and the plans that the city's had and the investment that we've made does matter. We are looking at it in the present tense because we have other people asking to invest in the corridor in more substantial ways and businesses that match the plans for the area. When he discusses the plan and says that retail uses are allowed within the plan, within a business park, the business park does allow certain uses within a specifically designed framework of design guidelines and criteria that help to make that a higher quality place. This is not in any way, shape, or form part of a business park, and so I don't think that analogy of saying used car lots would be allowed within the business park is correct in this format, because if you were to do a business park, this would never be the format in which you would do a used car lot. Related to factor number 7, this use is not reasonably necessary for the public convenience. As the applicant's attorney noted, there are other used car lots in the area, and they've shown no need for additional used car lots to serve the public need. There really is no relative gain to the public, in fact, possibly a detriment to the public here if this is approved. As you heard testimony from Rosedale Development Association, the used car lots are not the desired use of the community, and they don't feel like they fit the character of the community. And when you build things that don't fit the character of the community, you inherently reduce the public gain from the proposed development here. I guess with that, I would note the staff recommends denial and disagrees with the recommendation of the Planning Commission.
All right, so we have the item before us. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We have the item before us. We've heard the application, and we have it before us. Does any commissioner have a recommendation or a comment? Commissioner Bynum?
I have questions and comments and concerns, and some of this I think I'm going to need help from maybe Mr. Bach and some help from Mr. Richardson. But, you know, long before I ever was elected to be a commissioner, and several times since, we've had situations come in front of us where we're asking for a change of zone or a special use permit, and someone has made a substantial investment into a piece of property or a building without knowing if they can use that building for the purposes for which they've bought it. And I don't know how to solve that problem, but we seem to see it regularly, and there may be communication issues or otherwise that could help alleviate some of that in the future. It won't solve this problem, but we've heard that pretty loudly here with this particular application. And again, we've heard it before. This is not the first time that we have watched someone make an investment with the hope that they can have a zoning or change or a special use permit for something that they want to do. So maybe that's on us, and as a government and a community, we need to do a better job of helping people understand, if you're thinking about doing business here, let's try to walk through it together. I don't know. And I don't know if that needs a response right now. It's more of just an observation. And if it does need a response, I'm happy to hear that. I'm unaware that that plight is one of the factors to be considered in a planning and zoning application. I've never had that come forward as an allowable factor to be considered in a planning and zoning application. The factor that I was kind of focusing on was number 7. Whether the proposed use is reasonably necessary for the convenience and welfare of the public. And I don't know that it is. So I kind of land right there. The other piece that concerns me is the staff's comments in this application that landscaping is a code requirement, and for our board of planning to, it looks to me like what they did was sidestep that and vote to allow a special use permit that's outside of their purview. I'm not speaking to that correctly either, but what I'm seeing is that there are codes requirements here that our applicant is asking to not comply with. So
I can address the landscape issue. I don't, in the discussion when they were doing that and discussing that part of it, I don't believe they understood that that was the code and it would have required a variance. You know, sometimes under the overlay zone, there's an enhanced commercial screening requirement that they can provide some relief to the point of the actual ordinance, and then that requires a variance. And so I think there's a little bit of confusion there. I don't think they did that intentionally, and quite frankly, we had to go calculate that a little bit to make sure that that was the case after the fact. So I don't think that that was a rogue statement on the part of the Planning Commission. I think it was an honest mistake.
Helpful.
Can I jump in for a second? Can you pull the page up on the screen, the first page of our applicant of the packet?
You want the first page of the staff report?
Yes. Okay, go back up to the first page, the picture. So I'm looking at that picture in my book, and I counted, that's a car dealership next to him?
Yes, I believe so.
So I counted, just in my little picture, and of course I'm with my glasses, but I counted 39 cars in the car dealership next door. And they want to put 6 cars on this lot. Now, do I understand that the maximum number of cars they would have for sale out front would be 6?
That's correct.
Is that a stipulation that's in the...
Yes, it is.
It's already in there. So they're going to put 6 cars in front. And I'm not a fan of car dealerships. I'll just use car dealerships. I'll just go on record. I was pleased when we made the announcement. We decided to use special use permits to regulate them. I just look at the, and it is a 2-year special use permit. Has the other dealership applied for a special use permit, or are they grandfathered without that?
They're previously existing that don't have to comply with the special use permit regulations.
So they can be open as long as they're open?
Correct.
All right. I would say the character of this neighborhood isn't going to change. The character of this block isn't going to change until that other car dealership goes out of business or decides it doesn't want to be in business or does something different. Because we're legally bound to that 39-car lot next door indefinitely?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I'm just thinking if we're bound to the 39-car lot next door, I don't know that 6 more cars hurts anything. And without that piece of property, anyone that wants to redevelop this site, they're going to have to get the big lot to the left because the little lot that this is sitting on is going to be hard to develop with a giant car dealership next to it. So I agree with the staff that the highest and best use, and I agree with RDA, the highest and best use of Merriam Lane is not used car dealerships. But I also think until a purchase is made, and if a purchase is made on that larger car dealership, then there would be a time when we may not want to renew this special use permit for this little car dealership because there would be an opportunity for a higher and better use in this corridor. But I think as long as they have 39 cars next door, I don't know what harm it does to sell 6 more right next door to them. So that's my inclination, is I think until something happens to that other car dealership, and because if that other car dealership had a special use permit was getting ready to expire, and then we could really look at a redevelopment for this and really move it and work it, that would be fantastic. But until and unless that other car dealership goes away, I don't know why we wouldn't let 6 more be sold right next door. That's just my inclination. So with the caveat that I'm not excited about it. But I just think that it probably wouldn't hurt anything. That's my 2 cents. Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you, Mayor. I understand your point. Just one more comment on this particular application. The applicant is asking for approval for 2 years, basically also being allowed to be given 2 years to comply with the rest of the things that planning had asked be completed for this parcel, such as the sidewalk and the brick restoration on the building, as well as the landscaping plan. So the counsel for the applicant stated that it was strictly a transitional use, and so to me those statements are at odds, because we are saying in our report that we want to allow a special use permit and give them 2 years to comply with the stipulations we asked for, and then on the applicant side we're hearing, well, really, if you give us 2 years, you know, we'll find somebody to buy it, and this will be a purely transitional situation in the first place. And that just makes me think, so we won't have to put in the sidewalk, and we won't have to do the brick restoration and the other beautification that we've asked for, and I don't know why we're allowing those stipulations to be put in place. So
if I understood this correctly, Commissioner, and Mr. Richardson, correct me if I'm wrong, he would have to complete the brick restoration by the end of in next year, within the next 1 year?
Correct.
And then he'd have to do the shrubbery now.
Correct.
So we'd get the shrubs and we'd get the brick restoration. The other sidewalk on the north, what side is that? That the east side? It's all wonky in this direction here.
North.
The north side. He would have to do that sidewalk. He wouldn't have to do that unless in the next 2 years.
Unless it got renewed.
Unless it got renewed. Then if he got renewed for 2 more years, then he'd have to do that sidewalk. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so here we are. Does anyone else have any comments about? We have a recommendation, just to review with our attorney. We have a recommendation from the committee. It would take 6 votes to approve. It would take 6 votes to send back. It would take 8 votes to deny. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll ask if there's a motion.
I move that we move forward with it as recommended by the Planning and Zoning. Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second to approve the application as stated. Seeing no further comments, roll call.
Roll call, Kane. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Regia.
No.
Johnson.
No.
So the motion carries 6-2.
What I have. All right, the motion carries 6-2. It is approved for a 2-year special use permit. All right. That brings us to, that ends the planning and zoning portion of our meeting. Brings us to our regular session. Our regular session has a, yes, actually, Mr. Richardson, before you leave, if you would like to introduce your intern as you're done cleaning up.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Josh Robinson. He is a student in the Public Administration Graduate School at the University of Kansas, and he's our intern this semester. So welcome, Josh, and he was able to come to the meeting with us tonight to see how the commission meetings go.
All right, welcome. Always glad to welcome the Jayhawks. All right.
We're an equal opportunity employer, Mayor.
Touche. Commissioner Murguia.
Thank you very much, Mayor. If we're at the end of our meeting, I just wanted to make a quick announcement before we adjourn the meeting to the commissioners.
Okay.
Or is that okay? Is the right time right
We
now?
have one more item.
Okay, you want to do that, and then I will.
Okay. Now, the commission could break it into 3 items if they choose, but they don't have to. We have our non-planning consent agenda. Would any commissioner or person in attendance tonight like to remove an item? Any item not removed will be voted on by a single vote. Let the record show that there is no one moving to remove an item. There is a motion and a second. It's properly before us. Roll call.
Roll call, Kane. Markley. Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0.
All right, that concludes our business tonight. Commissioner, you have an announcement?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with the commission, I have some exciting news. I think most of you know that I am also a member of the Kansas Board of Regents. And at our last meeting, I'm excited to tell all of you that the Board of Regents approved the architectural plans and construction drawings for a new dental school at the University of Kansas on the KUMC campus site, which is located in Rosedale, as we all know, right here in beautiful Wyandotte County. We have 2 more steps to go through. In addition to the $2.5 million approved for the architectural plans to renovate the old Dyke Library on campus to turn into a dental school, we have to go through the process of encouraging our legislature to contribute $6.9 million annually to fund the dental school, and there'll be a $40 million capital campaign to build the dental school. So I'm very excited. We made it over the first hurdle, and I'd just appreciate this commission and our staff being supportive of that development. There was a lengthy study done a few years ago about the best location for the school, and it was clear that that was in Wyandotte County in Rosedale. So it's kind of exciting news.
That is great news. I appreciate your work on the Board of Regents, and We certainly want to be supportive of the growth at KU and providing great health, world-class healthcare right here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our meeting. We are adjourned.